Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the Y Factor. This is a live program and you've got Tasnim on the mic, joined by
Miran, and we're also joined by our special guest for this evening, and it's Rhonda Itaoui. Welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Rhonda, you've been kind enough to bring us some treats into the studio. But, you know, tasting these treats, they just don't taste like what you'd pick up from, say, churros. So you're here to tell us about the alternative way to live. So we're not, you know, gluttonous, commercial, additive eating, food preserve munching human beings. We are sustainable development, something organic, something, all those
Hipsters,
funky
basically.
words.
But just for the record, the actual sweets that she's brought in, even though they're all of the above, are actually divine. They taste great. What's the secret?
That's great. Well, it's all natural. So all ingredients are completely natural, healthy, wholesome, and really low in sugar. So it just comes to show that you can sweeten things in a way that isn't harmful to your body, and it isn't isn't in a way that's actually going to do some damage to your health. So you can live normally, enjoy treats, but you don't have to end up obese or with heart disease, as a process of that.
So, Rhonda, there's been a push, I guess, globally and more so even nationally for, food that is organic, that does not contain preservatives, additives and things like that. Where has this come from? What's the theory behind it? Why the push?
Okay, well, the push for this has come from particularly the ramifications or, the effects of food on our bodies. So we're seeing, a huge rise in diseases that didn't exist, 50 to 100 years ago. So that's one of the major reasons. And people are beginning to, look into food security. So how safe our food is for consumption, what the effects are on the human body, and the findings are pretty significant. So you can see that there is definitely a link between what we consume and our overall health as people. So that's the reason why people are really interested. And within my university degree, they're now pushing us to learn about this, to be educated about what we eat, the impact it has on our body, and the impact it has on everyone else around us as well. So it is really important. And there are, plenty of theories, nutritional theories and social theories that underpin it. But I don't think everyone's going to be interested in that at this point.
Well, do you know what? You'd be surprised. Like my own mother, for example, would often be reading a newspaper article or a magazine that would just mention a particular additive or some sort of, artificial colouring or something that is somehow remotely in some weird study linked to a possibility of cancer. And then suddenly that entire food product will be banned from our house for ever. So clearly some people do take it into account, and I mean, if it does lead to a serious disease like cancer, then there is good enough reason to look into this.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree. I think that it shouldn't really take an article though. So, we get that article about one or two preservatives, but we don't realize how hidden they are within our foods, within certain different discrete wording. So it's not until you start to investigate the product and you start to investigate different ingredients of the 50 ingredients listed on that package, you start to see what those ingredients actually are, like some of them being forms of plastic to mold things together that take your body around 4 to 5 days to digest.
Plastic in our food?
Yes, so forms of plastic in noodles to keep them together, all forms of things to keep our food lasting longer, to make us crave our food, to want to eat more and hence consume more. So these are all links to health issues. It's not, it doesn't have to be as serious as, cancer, just things like type 2 diabetes and obesity. The reason why we're eating more and, Australia's getting fatter is because the products we're eating have additives and preservatives and all these chemicals that are actually making this occur. It's not just by coincidence that we want to eat more.
I guess recent studies have shown that 1 in 3 people in their lifetime will have cancer of some sorts. So these studies are dramatic, and as you mentioned, Australia is a pretty overweight and obese country generally, as the research is showing. Now, your project is actually interesting because you've brought this to the Muslim community with your strategy has been that not only is it unhealthy and unorganic and things like that, but Islamically it's not the best for us either. What's the reasoning behind that?
Okay, well, this all started with an interest in sustainability, of course, at first. And then studying it at uni, I started to think, okay, so, is this Islamically related? Are we supposed to be eating these types of foods? Do we have an obligation to eat certain types of ways or, certain types of nutritional foods? So what I did was I started to look into food ethics in Islam, and, a lot of things started to come up, and a lot of common themes started, appearing. And a lot of these things looked at food that needed to be good, wholesome, safe and pure. So we're obligated to eat food that is actually good for us, for our bodies, to protect our bodies. And also there are ethics behind the process of how food is created, especially when animals are involved. So under that, the main points that I saw Islamically was that we have, an obligation over animal welfare and of course the welfare of our own bodies. And these harmful chemicals that are, undoubtedly just presenting all these issues, we can see there's a big problem. There's a huge grey area that isn't being tapped into, and we as an Islamic community should be at the forefront of these, of this advocacy against this unsafe food. We shouldn't be kind of just being the passive member of society. I think that we should say no, because it is part of our obligation to protect our body as humans.
It's funny because I think a lot of the times when we do talk about our obligations as Muslims in terms of food, the instant thought process takes you to things like slaughtering and the constant media coverage of, halal food and halal slaughtering and how that's, so inhumane and so on and so forth. And yet we know obviously that in our religion there is this huge emphasis on mercy to animals, and that even the slaughtering process itself is ordained on us as a form of mercy. So when we then talk about things like caging animals and stuffing them with hormones, which I think you can elaborate on because that was part of your research, wasn't it? That doesn't really sound like something that would fall under Islamic guidelines.
Yeah, well, a lot of people tend to think that halal meat is just restricted to slaughtering and the method of slaughtering. But when you start to really look into animal food production in Australia, so particularly Western societies like the US and Australia, I can't comment on, on developing countries or smaller communities, but within our food production system, it's highly industrial. So that brings a lot of issues when you're starting to talk about halal meat, because there are really strict guidelines in terms of how the animal is treated throughout its life and when it's being slaughtered. So it's not only about the slaughtering of the animal under Islamic guidelines. Once you start to look into it, there are certain rights to the animal as they are seen to be a member of our community, of the community in which, when we die, animals die as well. So we need to protect their welfare as humans with reason.
Well, Rhonda, in terms of that, what can we do to sort of encourage that humane treatment? And do you think that we should, as Muslims, be going organic?
Yeah, well, I think that the first thing you need to understand is the way that industrial food production works. So I'll give you a quick rundown on that. It's basically, with industrial food production, it's highly mechanical, and animals are kept confined in really small spaces. So like you said before, caging and factories. So animals are basically rarely even see daylight within industrial food production, and a lot of our halal meat is coming out of these factories. So the highly mechanical process means animals are killed by machines, not hand slaughtering. So that whole sense of mercy gets lost, because with machines generally might slip in terms of positioning of where the animal is killed, so it might not hit the neck. And that's something that generally happens in industrial food production. The animal does move sometimes, and it does get the wrong spot. So that's one issue. Secondly, the animal rights aren't protected. They're not in their natural environment. They're confined. They're not living the way they would usually in their natural environment. So that's one big violation of their rights. And on top of that, what we need to see is that in terms of halal production, are we getting that Bismillah factor at the time of the animal being killed, or within that mechanical process, is it being lost? So not only do we have the slaughtering issue in terms of positioning of the slaughtering and that whole Bismillah factor of it, we've lost the whole welfare aspect of the animal's life. And that's why when you talk about organic meat, you can see that organic farming is a great alternative. Do any of you know about organic farming at all?
No, do enlighten us, dear.
Well, organic farming basically returns an animal to its natural environment. It doesn't use any hormones like industrial food production does, and it actually gives that animal the proper food that it's supposed to be grazing on.
But the thing with organic, which is often raised as a criticism, is that unlike regular food industry, it's not regulated as heavily or as strictly. They don't follow the same sort of health and hygiene guidelines that are out there for the regular food industry. So even though they're in their natural habitat and so on and so forth, how do you actually guarantee that organic is, really as healthy as it's said to be?
Yeah, well, firstly, I think that the elimination of that regulation comes from the fact that the animal is being raised and killed naturally. So I think when you start to follow things in a natural form, you don't need these guidelines as strict as you do in industrial production, where you're starting to mix chemicals, you're starting to mix machinery, and that's where those guidelines need to come in. So when you're doing things in a natural form, undoubtedly it's going to eliminate those risks. However, in terms of looking at halal organic meat, we'd need to have some type of body that would obviously assess that and have some type of, evaluation at the point of production, because it'll be a lot larger in scale. So I'm sure that those regulatory bodies or frameworks might be able to come through eventually, but it's something really good to consider, I believe, at this point.
Well, what'll it take?
I think it's all about consumer power. There's a lot of movements in the United States and the UK. One of the movements in the United States is called the Green Deal, and they actually look at sustainable sustainable food, sustainable living, and even things like they're pushing for Islamic events, for example, not to have, disposable things, so like water bottles and cups that are unnecessarily disposed of,
Going green just generally.
That's right. The Green Deal, the Green Profit and things like that, and bringing it back to when there is demand for it in the community, when there is consumer demand generally for this product, then there would be that niche market and providers will need to basically provide that service.
That's exactly right.
The pulling power, and I think that's what, I guess, it starts with awareness. When people know that this should be an issue, they should be on their mind, and then the next level would kind of be action.
So after awareness, the onus then becomes us as a community to take action.
Yeah, that's right. What I always think is that we have a right to be safe, and if we demand that right, then it will be delivered. Companies want to make their money. And if we demand a product, it's gonna be delivered. So if we keep saying yes to what we have at the moment, things will never change. But I do think that as our Islamic obligation, once we know that we're doing things in an incorrect manner in terms of our health and for animal welfare, we need to take action, like you said. And I think that awareness will be a great start. And if people are always interested, I'm always happy to share information with them. They're more than welcome to contact me and start some initiatives along these lines.
And if anyone has any questions about this, we will post a link and tag you on Facebook, Rhonda. So if anyone does have any further questions, they can direct them at you.
Rhonda, it's been a pleasure chatting to you, and it's really nice to see, I guess, young Muslims being active in areas of concern that are not just kind of, national concern, but global concern. Sustainability and these issues is something that we as the human race need to think about, because otherwise we're being selfish and we're forgetting the generations ahead. So it's been our pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.